In this episode of The Thoughtful Photographer, I'm going to show you a cool and very simple trick for using a monopod to shoot aerial images. Hi, I'm Joe Edelman, and you're watching The Thoughtful Photographer, the web series that teaches you how to think like a professional photographer and pulls back the curtain on the thought process and the psychology of making great photographs. This is a monopod, sometimes called a unipod. Mono meaning one leg, compared to a tripod, which has 3 legs. I know. Tell you something you didn't already know, right? Well, let me begin by saying that I think the monopod is potentially the most underappreciated camera support for both still and video photography. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to show you a cool trick that comes from my early days as a newspaper photographer. Using a monopod, we can take a shot like this and turn it into this. Or we can go from this to this. No ladder required. The technique is very simple. Extend your monopod to its full length. Mount your camera with a wide-angle lens. In this example, I'm using a 14mm lens on a full-frame Nikon D800. Do a test shot or two to determine the proper exposure. Set the self-timer. Hoist the monopod above your head and wait for the shutter to fire. Sounds pretty easy, right? It is actually that simple. But let's be sure to point out a few important considerations that should be a part of your thought process when you use this technique. Let's start with lens selection. I recommend using a wide-angle lens for 2 reasons. One, it's more forgiving with regard to the composition because it takes in more area. If you use a longer lens, or even a 50mm for that matter, you have to be much more exact in the way you aim the camera while it's on top of the monopod. The second reason I like to use a wide-angle lens is for the additional depth of field that it provides. Now this brings us to focusing. If you understand how to use depth of field properly, in addition to using a wide-angle lens and a smaller aperture, which is highly recommended for this technique, you'll want to focus approximately 1/3 of the way into your scene. With a camera above your head, you're not going to be able to do this with autofocus, so it requires that you focus in advance, using either manual focus or autofocus and then locking the focus before you hoist the camera. The final and potentially most important consideration is how much do you tilt the camera to compose the shot. The rookie mistake here is to think that you have to tilt the camera way forward because you have it elevated so high. Well, it's actually not that high, so if you're using a wide-angle lens, you only need to tilt the camera slightly forward. Now it does take a little practice, but not much considering that you can take multiple shots at varying angles to be sure that you get what you need. But please, don't be the photographer who is afraid to shoot multiple frames to get the shot right. Discs are cheap. You spend thousands of dollars on a camera, buy a few extra discs. You only get them once, and it's not like you're wasting film. So there you have it, a quick and easy trick to get elevated shots using a monopod and a wide-angle lens. Now, since this is the thoughtful photographer, let me also point out a few other options that you might want to experiment with. Option number 1, you can use a wired or wireless cable so that you can take multiple frames every time you lift the camera, instead of waiting for the self-timer and only getting 1 frame in each lift. I generally use a Nikon wired remote trigger. There are tons of name brand and off-brand wired and wireless triggers available for most cameras today. Do a little research at B&H or Adorama, and don't forget Amazon or eBay for some really good bargains. Option number 2, you could add a ball head to the top of the monopod to allow you to tilt the camera down even more, but still maintain the full height of the monopod raised above your body. Please do remember that DSLR cameras with a lens can get pretty heavy, so you might want to be sure that you're strong enough to support your camera above your head, and make sure that you don't use a cheap or lightweight monopod. I hate to see it bend or snap when you have your camera on top of it. Option number 3. If you're really crazy and want a lot more height, you could go to Home Depot and purchase a heavy-duty painter's pole that will take you up to around 23 feet. And then purchase a pole pixie adapter so that you can mount your camera on top of the painter's pole. Just be sure to purchase a heavy-duty pole. You don't want that lightweight pole that will snap while your expensive DSLR is 20 feet plus up in the air. Now, for the real tech geek photographers, and you know who you are, option number 4. You could add a gadget like a cam ranger to be able to use your phone or iPad as a remote viewfinder, which would also make it very difficult to hold the monopod. In other words, keep it simple, stupid. The more gadgets you add to the mix, the less easy it is to use this technique. Huh? Links? Relax. I know, some of you are yelling at your computer screen because I mentioned all those cool gadgets and didn't tell you where to get them. After the video, click over to my blog. The link is in the info section below. I've included links to all the products there. If you like what I'm doing, please give the video a thumbs up and take a second to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss a single episode. So that's all for this episode of The Thoughtful Photographer. I'm Joe Edelman, and until next time, keep thinking, keep learning, and keep shooting.